welcome to the PhD Journey Unplugged podcast. I'm Dr. Sarah Gordon. I am the host of the show, and you can see that I have a guest with me today, actually a returning guest, my friend, Dr. Gregory Gibbons. Welcome back.
Nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Before we get started, I always like to say up front that all the information that we share on this podcast is for general informational purposes only, and it's not professional advice. So it's just important for us to clarify that before we get started. And the last time you were on, it was episode 18. And so if you're listening today and joining us for the first time, go back and listen to that podcast episode. It was excellent. We talked about thriving beyond burnout. And I think it got, across the platforms that I can look at the analytics too, several of the platforms. I think it got the most views out of any of my episodes. A great episode. So I highly encourage
Wonderful.
our listeners to go back and listen to that. And I also kind of introduced you with a very long introduction. So anyhow, Dr. Gibbons is just quite a human being and very accomplished. And I'm not going to list all your accomplishments because I think it embarrasses you a little bit. But I am going to say that he's a board certified emergency medicine physician, and he's worked in ER and as an ER physician for many years. He's really devoted a lot of time and a lot of heart and a lot of passion and just a lot of long hours to emergency medicine. So thank you for doing that for everybody whose lives that you have saved. I know firsthand that you have literally saved lives, and it's incredible. So first of all, I want to commend you on that.
Thanks.
Okay. He also and our lives intersected. He decided to go back and get a PhD on top of being a physician. So he has a PhD in leadership in health and human performance. And so that's kind of where our worlds intersected. And that was a hard program. It was 5 years of a lot of hard work. And he did it all around being an ER physician. So it was quite an accomplishment. So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, to further embarrass you, he is a 16-time Ironman finisher. I mean, really extraordinary. A lot of hard work, a lot of consistency, a lot of discipline goes into being a triathlete and especially at the Ironman distance. And so it's just incredible to think that you've done so many. I'm sure you've done dozens of half Ironmans. I don't know what that number looks like, but as a multi-sport athlete and, the Xterra platform and, off-road racing and all that, I'm sure there's hundreds of races. And I know firsthand you've podiumed at a lot of races too. So another, outstanding resume and it gives you credence to what we're going to talk about today, that you truly are an expert in terms of our topic today. So it's wonderful. He's also was a Kona finisher. I don't know if it was more than once or even just once. A world championship at Kona is another amazing accomplishment. And I picked up on a quote that I'm just going to kick off this session with, and then we'll settle into the topic that you said, and you wrote somewhere. Health is the foundation of a high functioning life, and with the right systems, it can be trained, optimized, and sustained. And I think that's really the whole point of, what this platform is even about. This podcast is even about how do we live our best lives and how do we sustain that? So with all that, I know it was a mouthful, but it was shorter than the last time, our last podcast episode. Anyhow, we're talking about building health equity, the long game of human performance. And, when I reached out to Greg to come back on the show, I asked you, what do you want to talk about on this episode? And you really came up with this. And I think it's great that how we're going to look at human performance as an investment in our health, as we would financial investing, right? And we know that through financial investing, it's a long-term approach. And then we reap the benefits from it when we sustain it over long-term performance. So with that said, how do you want to start today?
Well, I tell you what, let me tell you a story first.
Okay, good.
The idea of this actually came from an interaction that I had with a patient. So my life is pretty interesting in that I get to see both ends of the spectrum. I work with high performance people from a coaching standpoint, but then, when I put on the stethoscope and I go to work, I actually work with a lot of people that have a lot of chronic diseases. The emergency department is fraught. It's filled with people that are suffering from long-term consequences of poor lifestyle. And so I get to see the kind of spectrum from the best performing to people that aren't quite so lucky. And I one of my things that I've got as I've gotten older, I really love to talk to some of my older patients, and to the wisdom that they have. And so my favorite patient is the 85, the 95-year-old, the 100-year-old. In fact, the 100-year-olds, when I spend more time talking to them about life, and the wisdom that they've gained from those years, that I do, the medicine aspect of it. To me, it's very, very intriguing. But I had a patient that actually said, I spent my entire life, focusing on making sure that I was financially stable for myself and for my family. And in order for, I spent years and years concentrating on making sure that I had a good financial portfolio and that I was diversified enough. And, he's like, I neglected my health the entire time. He goes, if I had known I was going to live this long, I would have lived better.
Mm,
And I would have taken care of myself, because now I have so many chronic medical conditions as a result of the years of neglect that, although I did hit my financial goals, I can't do anything. I can't travel now. He's like, I barely leave the house. And so I've got a lot of financial means as a result of financial discipline. But he says and I'll use his quote. He said he was biologically bankrupt. And I thought that was a really impressive insight, and something that obviously he had thought a lot about. And then, as I kind of started to play with the idea a little bit, I started to see the similarities between financial planning and health. And so I'm a huge proponent that our biggest asset is our health, whether it is our ability to maintain function, our ability to optimize potential, our ability to be very functional, to be able to go out for a walk, to be able to travel, all those things. People have this notion of retirement that is free and easy as a result of good financial planning and living within your means and making good decisions up until that point. But when people think about retirement, that conversation is dominated completely by this discipline of finance.
mhm.
And so we know that people that invest long term and consistently without trying to time the market, they generally do pretty well. And it's that idea of consistency and compounding interest. That's the secret to financial freedom. But whenever you talk to people about their health, oftentimes, it's something that they don't put nearly as much emphasis on. They don't think about the consequences of what I refer to as health debt. We think about
I like that. I like that.
the,
Health debt.
the yeah, no. So that's what
I
chronic
like that.
disease is. It's health debt.
Health debt.
Whether it be diabetes, hypertension, poor sleep, high cortisol levels, obesity, all these lifestyle related things are health debt. And the interest has to be paid. And that oftentimes the interest is paid later in life, in your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's when that becomes due. And so that lifestyle of poor, or that lifetime of poor lifestyle, will eventually catch up with
Yep,
you.
with
And
you.
that's that interest that so having chronic medical conditions, like diabetes, high blood pressure, that are unmanaged, unresolved, poorly managed, is like having high interest debt.
Interesting. I always say it's so cliche, but it's so true. I always say health is wealth, is your wealth. Because without it, it really doesn't matter how much wealth you have. You can't enjoy it. So I always say that. So I love that we are kind of bringing it into this conversation. And the other thing about financial planning is that if we, whenever you find this episode, whenever you listen to it, and maybe you're in your 20s or 30s and you find this episode that we're recording today, start thinking about these things earlier in your life, right? Just like financial planning. If you start putting away money when you're younger, it grows over time. So if you start investing in your health earlier in your life, then maybe it sets you up for success as you age with good health. Now, Greg knows because he's a physician, a lot of things, a lot of disease, it's random. We don't know really why one person gets something over somebody else if you do everything right. Okay? So there's a lot of randomness to health. But there are things that we can control to try to set ourselves up for success. And it's just like the markets, right? We can invest and we know market volatility. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know, but when you have a long-term mindset and all of that, usually you fare pretty well in the long term with your investments. You ride the storms and you stay, in it. And in the long term, your money grows. So it's the same thing with your health. We just don't know, but we may as well try to invest in it early on and throughout our life. Now, let me ask you something. What happens if you start to think this way, but you start at age 60? I mean, what does medicine show us in terms of, can you catch up, right? How can you catch
Yeah,
up?
there's
It's
a
like a
number of responses to
financial,
this.
you know?
But the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
I
The
know,
second best
but
time is today, right?
right. What do
So
you do?
yeah, no. So it doesn't matter. Yes, for sure, you're going to have higher gains. You're going to have more rewards. You're going to have a better portfolio if you've spent 30 or 40 years
Right.
doing structured strength training programs, and you've been doing cardiovascular activity, you've been maintaining mobility, you've been maintaining proprioception, you're making all these deposits into this diversified portfolio. You're absolutely going to see more long-term rewards that
Mhm.
way, for sure. But we also know that if you have um, no no investments and you're in your 50s and 60s, you don't want to necessarily do nothing, right?
Right.
That's when you start to invest. Then we call it the catch up, and there's
Right.
some benefits to that. And so we know that it doesn't matter if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. There are gains to be made by investing in the basics of health and wellness, which for me, there's just as though there's multiple investment streams, whether you're talking ETFs or mutual funds or bonds or all these different places that you can put your money in monetary investments. There's also a lot of different places you can put your health benefits, and that includes things like sleep, cardiovascular activity, strength training, all these different things that you can make deposits into. And the more diversified you are in that, the more likely you are going to be in a sound health situation, much like your financial situation would be. And so there are certainly things that are bigger bangs for your buck than others, much like in the world of finance. There are things that are safe. Going for a walk, is dramatically much lower risk than being a 68-year-old joining a CrossFit gym.
Hey, can I
Yes,
just
there's
one
sure.
thing? I just want to go back to because what you just said, and I don't know how many people actually say this in the health promotion space, and I really think it's important. You're just giving the example of diversifying in your portfolios and financial investment. So to take that mindset into health and wellness, I think that's really interesting. And I think if we look at it in terms of diversifying what we're doing and reaping the benefits from that diversification. I hope that's a word. Um, we might find more enjoyment in things too, I mean, because that's the key is enjoyment. And we know the research shows us that when you enjoy the things that you're doing, you're more likely to stick with them and have longer term adherence to them. So I just wanted to go back to them and say, I think that's really important because I don't know that people necessarily look at like health and physical activity and all these things in terms of diversification of it. At sleep, how important sleep is, nutrition, physical activity, participating in all kinds of different things, like you said, walking. It's highly individualized. But I like thinking that way. So I just want to go back to that and say that I like that. That was good.
So I think that the big thing
You should do a
with
chart.
no, there's a lot in this for sure. It's funny if you were to invest, let's say, $10,000 in a fund that is very safe and stable. It's going to, let's say a 10-year bond. You're gonna gain, the investment's going to yield about 4%. 4% over 1 year, you're going to look at it and be like, wow, that investment probably wasn't that lucrative. But if you look at that investment over 30 years with compounding, then that's a massive gain that you have there. Um, and it's very common knowledge in the world of finance that longevity is the biggest. How long you're in the market is when you're going to gain the most rewards. But in health and fitness, people go to the gym for the first 3 weeks of January and they don't see an appreciable gain. And so they think that what they're doing isn't working or it's no longer worth it. But people have to look at it in terms of finance. The longer you're in it, the more rewards you're going to get, and they do in fact compound. But
Love that.
the gains that you get are almost as glacial as the as money market accounts. This is one of those things that people get in. They go to the gym and they literally want to have a 70% tech stock return in 2 weeks, and they're not getting it, and so they oftentimes will abandon that approach because they don't feel like the commitment that they're making to their health and wellness is that way. But it works the same way. It works year in, year out. It works the same way. So the longer you're in the game, the more benefits you get, and they do tend to compound. Now, there is this notion of health inflation. Health inflation is it's what we call aging.
Okay. I'm writing
Aging
these
is
down. I
uh,
always learn so much. I was excited to have you on because I'm like, I'm going to learn a lot today. Okay.
yeah.
Health
So
inflation.
yeah, health inflation. When the analogous thing to inflation is aging,
Okay.
because there is this law of diminishing returns. Because with aging, we do have physiologic decay of almost every organ system in our body. And perhaps your money just doesn't go as far. That workout is not getting the same amount of benefit as it did when you were 35 years old. You're not getting the same amount of gains. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. That it just means that perhaps the gains aren't as much, and perhaps you're fighting a battle that none of us like to age well. None of all of us are kicking and screaming with this whole age thing. But we have to understand that it's not what we do on any day, on any particular day. It's what we do year in and year out that makes the biggest difference.
Cumulatively. Hmm.
Yes, for
So
sure.
what do you think about this then? Just throwing analogies out there. So a market disruption, right? We have market volatility. We know, in terms of the stock market, bear markets and, just different things. Could you say that's maybe sometimes we have a setback? So, something like if you're an athlete, you have an injury, there's just something in your life that kind of sets you back. And sometimes that derails people, but really just look at it as something very temporary and then just to get back on track. Because in the long run, you're going to continue to make progress. So don't let these little things that you can't control or that, it's unpredictable, derail you from your goals. So you like that one?
Yeah, I do. I really like that a lot. And actually, it's what I usually
I
call,
just thought of it.
in the financial world, we call them corrections.
There, yeah,
And
correction.
in my life, I call them ego checks.
Ego.
And so, for me, my net worth, the analogy is that, let's say, my VO2 max, because it is linked to the lowest cause. A high VO2 max basically means that it's very predictive that you're going to be free of disease. There's no factor in all of medicine that predicts longevity better than VO2 max
So
for
wait, wait,
all-cause mortality.
pause there for a second. That's a big
Mhm.
statement. So the research,
All-cause mortality.
the research supports that.
Yes.
That's a huge statement. And if you're listening, and can you just explain to people what VO2 max is in case they
VO2 max
don't know?
is a pretty simple parameter. Basically, it comes down to how much oxygen can your body utilize. And let's say when you breathe in, you're breathing in oxygen. It's being delivered to the muscle, and so how much of that oxygen can your body utilize metabolically? And so somebody that has very high cardiorespiratory capacity, let's say an Ironman triathlete, a professional Ironman triathlete has an extremely high VO2 max. Their body can utilize a tremendous amount of oxygen aerobically versus somebody that's very sedentary is going to have a very low VO2 max. Let's say that person that's sitting on the couch that's overweight, that's in their early 60s, they may have a VO2 max as low as 25. And so somebody that is, a very high level endurance athlete, let's say a professional Ironman triathlete, they can very easily have numbers that are in the low 80s, 82, 85, somewhere in that range.
Greg, wait, just real quick. It's also important to mention it's age specific too, right?
Um,
Like it changes as we age.
it's yeah, no, it decreases with
Okay.
age for
Just want to make
sure.
sure there's an age component to it.
Yeah, there are age adjusted norms
Right.
for people, and they'll break it down into low fitness through exceptional, and so those are based on population averages, not necessarily athletes. So if you're looking at an age group athlete, those charts may not be particularly appropriate. But we do know that the higher your VO2 max, the lower all-cause mortality is, and
That's
there's
incredible.
actually it's been shown that there's no upper limit to this. And so it's not your traditional U-shaped curve with this. So um, let's say that if for me, VO2 max is kind of like my physiologic net worth. That's
Okay.
really what it comes down to. And so getting back to your point of these market corrections, let's say I'm in a period where I'm trying to, and in my own personal life, I measure VO2 max very consistently. I have a home device that measures it, and I actually have goals at the end of the year that I want to raise it by X amount. And
Wow.
over the course of the last 6 months or so, I've had a few market corrections, i.e., injuries, that have kept me from, doing a lot of those high intensity VO2 max workouts that would keep me from getting to that goal. But that doesn't mean that I can't adjust. So my VO2 max is, X number. My goal is to have, it be 2 or 3 higher by the end of the year. If I get injured, I'm going to backtrack, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say to hell with it. I'm going to sit on the couch and do this. I just have to adjust and heal, make some adjustments and heal, and then go back to a growth phase.
So it's a good VO2 max because we're not gonna, I mean, we could probably, it would be, I'd love to do an episode on that, just really dive into that. But that's just one part of what we're talking about today. But so VO2 max is considered like an index, like an indicator of I can't remember the names of the indicators in the financial market. I used to work for a financial investment firm, but it's just like an indicator
Yes.
for your health. So just to make it a little bit more like layman's terms for our listeners, it's just one more way to like track um, your health and your wellness. I mean, there are other ways too. Like I know you monitor your sleep, you know, you can also
Religiously.
right. You can monitor your sleep and how the quality of sleep that you're getting. Blood work, routine blood work, right? Check your numbers, check your vitamin, see if you have vitamin deficiencies, things. So just like in the financial world, there's all these different like performance indicators. There's the same for us, physiologically, with our health and our wellness. So yeah, so interesting. All right, carry on.
I use a few different ones. I use a few different performance indicators. I have strength benchmarks for myself for each year. It has to do with bench pressing weight and grip strength and some of these other things. And then I have aerobic capacity. So sometimes that can be VO2 max, sometimes that can be my mile time, sometimes that another one, because I'm a cyclist as well. I look at my FTP, which is functional threshold power, which is the greatest amount of power that I can sustain for an hour. These are physiologic benchmarks that I use in order to track my overall net physiologic worth. And
Hmm.
so these all go into I track all of these numbers just as closely as I track my investments.
Investments. But I mean, what do you say to somebody? So, I mean, I feel like you're like the role model of, how we track data and how we integrate it into our lives. What do you say to somebody so they don't feel overwhelmed by that? What do you say to somebody who is just coming in and doesn't have a lot of confidence in investing? Let's say you're a
First
financial,
thing is to start.
just to start. Okay.
Just to start. And you have to keep it very simple. So
Okay.
you don't go into financial planning. You don't go into the world of investing and suddenly if you had to use formulas that Warren Buffett used
Hmm.
in order to acquire his mass. He started investing when he was 11. He's 90. I don't know how old now, but super complex, very, very exceedingly complex, but yet using the same principles available to anybody. And so, if you're going to get started in financial planning, first thing you have to do is figure out where you are.
Hmm.
That's the first step. Figuring out where you are, where and so I asked somebody, you have in order to know where you want to be, you have to figure out where you are. And so having an accurate
True.
assessment of where you are currently is going to be the first step in getting to that. And so in the health and wellness space, we see people that have very high aspirations. They want to say, let's just say they're in the classic example is a 35-year-old man that has established his family. He's established his career.
Hmm.
He's in the heart of his most productive years as a contributing member of the economy. So he's got himself all set up. He starts to get a little itchy bitchy and twitchy, and he's like, okay, well, what's next? Okay.
Hmm.
And so oftentimes we see these people, and they're like, okay, well, I need to get in shape.
Hmm.
And they say, okay, well, I haven't been doing much for the last couple of years because of the kids and the job, but I want to do something now. And so they come to you and they say, I want to do an Ironman.
Ironman, I knew that's where yeah.
I want to do an Ironman. And I'm just like, let's back up a little bit. Let's back up a little bit. Let's figure out, okay, where are you? What's your background? You have to kind of figure out where you are first before you can jump ahead to that. Somebody that comes to you with absolutely no savings, they have no net worth, and they're like, I want to retire with $5 million because then I can live on the 4% rule at 200,000, whatever. They have these huge aspirations, but they're not coming from anywhere. And so oftentimes you have to back people up a little bit and say, okay, well, these ultra rich people, these ultra rich or these ultra fit people started somewhere, you know. And the most inspiring of those people are the people that don't have much background in endurance sports. So they didn't come from much. They grew up with no money, but now they've, accomplished this over time. Those are very inspiring stories and give everybody hope because that's really what they want. And so you have to back them up a little bit and figure out where they are currently before developing a plan moving forward. And so much like a financial advisor, you have to find the right advisor in health and wellness. A
Coach,
lot of people, a coach, a coach
coach.
is a good example of a financial advisor for
Yeah.
health.
Hmm.
It always fascinates me when people will spend $20,000 a year for a money manager to invest their $1 million. They have no problem spending that on it, but they won't spend $100 to,
Themselves.
to to talk to a coach or something like that. And so what I'm trying to express is that people's need to have a much much higher emphasis on protecting their health,
Yeah.
just as they would be investing just as they're protecting their financial future.
Yeah, and
because your health is your greatest asset, bar
it
none.
is. It is. And when you were just giving an example of the the stories that are inspiring, the people that start from really not a strong background, and they build, these two words came to my mind, building blocks,
Mhm.
right? Everything, we sometimes we live in a culture we want things instantaneously, and truthfully, that's kind of like how this podcast, kind of this whole idea grew out of it, because in the PhD journey, as we both know, we got accepted. We're super excited. We start the first class, and you come out of the gate all excited, and you're just like you said, in the gym in January, all excited. And then reality hits, you need, it's like a slow and steady, not slow is relative, I get it, but a steady forward moving process, right? And you have to set these, and we didn't get to the finish line by jumping there. We had to get the coursework done, and all these building blocks along the way. And so that's really where my messaging and where this idea came from, like just to remind people, like, don't give up, like don't give up on yourself. We all have obstacles. Believe me, Greg and I, if we spent time talking about our obstacles, but just trust us. When you think about how busy our lives get, there's no reason we should have our PhDs, but we do. We overcame those obstacles. And if you're listening to us today and you feel, financially depleted with your health, don't feel defeated. Listen to this episode today and say that you can take control today. You can have some autonomy, take that first step, believe in yourself, and you can find your way out. I really believe that. I think the research shows at any age, and I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, at any age when you start to strength train, your body wants to be healthy. It shows signs of progress. You grow muscle. I mean, all these things, like it ultimately wants to be healthy as an organism. It's always trying to heal itself. It's always, we push it to these points where maybe it becomes so clinical you can't get healthy. I don't know. I'm not a physician. You are. But I think in essence, give yourself a chance to invest in your health, in your well-being, and the reason this is important because it impacts all aspects of your life, your mental health, your relationships in your life. So that's just my little spiel. I want to ask you something. I'm curious because you are an ER physician, and I have to ask you this. I think my listeners would be interested too. Do you see some type of illness more often than others? Is there something that is more prevalent? And do you find it related to health in terms of how we're taking care of ourselves? I'm just curious. Or is it just lots of different random things?
No, the biggest disease that I see on a daily basis is disease of poor lifestyle.
Okay. So I was curious. So,
So lifestyle diseases are those that are influenced by making poor health decisions.
okay.
And I would say if you look at things like acute illnesses, let's say acute cerebrovascular injuries like strokes or hemorrhagic strokes, or you're thinking about acute decompensated heart failure or renal disease or a heart attack or any of these things didn't happen overnight, right?
Okay.
This is the result of a lifetime of neglect, more than anything. And so lifestyle diseases are probably the biggest contributor to morbidity and mortality
I
that we
think you
see
called it
today.
health debt.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is all health debt. So you're
Health
starting to
debt.
pay interest on things like sedentary lifestyle, not controlling factors like high blood pressure, right? Not controlling your blood sugar, not controlling adiposity, obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. We know these all contribute. And there is a lifestyle component to all of those. Of course, you cannot ignore the genetic component of some of those things, but we do know that lifestyle changes can independently modify those genetic factors to reduce the impact that they have on the development of chronic disease. And so, I think by and large, whether it be, you know, of the acute emergencies, none of them happened that day, right? With the
That's a really
exceptions of the,
strong, that's another, just wait, what, that's a big statement.
yeah.
That's a
So, I mean,
big statement.
let's ignore for the accidents, the broken
Right,
legs, that
right.
sort of thing.
But you're
But
in
I'm going to
ER.
go into the chronic disease states. Those things happened, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where they could have made a substantial impact on risk reduction. Um, and um, and that's not to say that you can completely eliminate risk as a result of having a pristine lifestyle, but your chances of making a bigger difference are off the charts. You can certainly improve
One second.
your yeah, go ahead.
Risk, financial risk. Okay. There's another, you could build that in terms of, some people are very conservative, some people very, high risk. So maybe very conservative approach to life is, like a sedentary life, right? And if you put yourself out there and you take some risks, the higher you go on that risk chart, I don't know. Maybe that's like the ultra endurance. I don't know. I just thought about that. You'll have to,
Well,
can
it's
you put
interesting
that in
that you
more
say that because
intellectual?
well, no,
Help me.
it's an interesting approach because I will say that for me, much like my investment portfolios, as I'm getting closer to retirement, I'm taking less risks, right?
Okay.
Same thing in my endurance world. You're probably not going to see me on the start of an Ironman start line anytime soon. To be honest with you, at this stage of my life, with regards to injuries and stuff, the risk is too high.
Okay.
But you will see me at the gym every day. You will see me doing strength training every day, but you will not see me doing back squats. Okay.
Okay.
You will not see me doing heavy
Let's
deadlifts.
do higher
Okay.
risk.
Because those things are high risk given
Okay.
my age now. Okay.
Okay.
Now, do I do strengthening in all those movements? Absolutely. But you will not see me doing a CrossFit class. I don't have the musculotendinous um I get hurt when I do that. Every year I try and do something funny, and my mantra in the gym is don't get cute. Okay. Because I will get hurt. And I know that the biggest factor that contributes to me not meeting my long-term life and health span goals is injury for me.
Mhm.
And so at this stage of the game, as I've gone by 50 and as I approach 55, I'm being more conservative in my investments um, to health and wellness. I'm taking less chances. Okay. Gone are the days that I'm going to be doing a lot of downhill mountain biking. One of my absolute loves. Um, you probably won't see me skiing through mogul fields next week in the trees. Um,
Okay, and this
it's
is
just not that's very high risk for me. So I'm not doing it anymore
okay,
because it's no longer worth the investment.
so that's interesting because what I think you're saying is that you're open to adapting. And I think
Yeah.
that's a key to success in aging and sticking with things in your life is being adaptable, right? Being adaptable is a key to success. So just like you're framing this conversation in relationship to financial investing. So just like when you sit down with your advisor annually, or maybe you sit down with them quarterly or twice a year, and you look at your portfolio and you see how you're doing, you make adjustments. You make adjustments and corrections, to it based on their expertise, but based on the market and what your goals are. So you don't just put it in and forget about it. Usually, and most people will meet with their professional um, financial advisor on some sort of regular basis. And you have to adapt, you have to adjust your portfolio. So I think that's what you're saying is with aging, with good health, and to have some longevity in it, you have to sometimes make adjustments and corrections and come to peace with things a little bit. I think there's some, I think with aging, I'm not saying like I am one of these people like I just want to crush it until I can, I want to embrace as much as I can. But I think you have to make some peace with, what did you call it? Health inflation. There's just some reality to it. And I think when you don't pull back a little bit or make some modifications, you can get injured, like you're saying. You can really set yourself back. Well,
I think the
this
biggest
is
thing,
such a
and you
this is
touched on
interesting.
you touched on this idea of goals. Um,
Okay.
and I think that that is something that eludes a lot of people. There are a lot of people that just kind of go through life hoping that things work out the way that they want.
Hmm.
There's a big difference between people that accomplish big things and people that don't. And most of the time, it's that piece of goal setting. Okay. People that accomplish big things know where they're going. And so oftentimes when you sit down with a financial planner, it's kind of built into the whole thing. You're developing a plan for how we get there. But when people have health, they don't develop a health plan. It's
No.
it's one of those things where, so let's say, and you can develop a goal for every decade. Let's say at age 80 I want to be able to walk 5 miles. I want to be able to get on the floor and be able to get off the floor without help. I want to be able to carry 2 bags of groceries that are 20 pounds. I want to be able to climb 4 flights of stairs independently.
Hmm.
So, and then at age, you can create goals for every decade. But if you want to be able to do all that stuff at age 80, you better be able to do two or three times that when you're 60, and
Let me ask
double
you,
that when you're
let
when
me ask
you're
you,
when you're 70.
let me ask you a question. When you went through medical school, as you're talking, I'm thinking we learned about exercise as medicine through the American College of Sports Medicine. There's a whole platform, exercise as medicine. When you went through medical school, do they talk about, you know, think about when you go to your physician for your annual checkups, they check blood pressure, they take your weight. We don't talk about health goals. I mean, do they even talk about that stuff in medical school? Do they
No, and
train you?
part of it may be related to just the nature of medicine and how it's becoming more efficient and time crunched. And um, I think that that's probably in the purview of our colleagues within the health and wellness field rather than your physician. I do think that in the perfect world, going to your primary care doctor, they would not only assess your blood pressure and your cholesterol levels and your A1C and
Mhm.
look at your cardiovascular risk and, try to do what they can to do risk reduction. It would be great if they were able to do some sort of functional capacity evaluation and look at your balance
Yeah.
and your strength within certain, just some very simple metrics that they could do to give you a better global idea of how you're doing. And those are age adjusted. Obviously, the 80-year-old it's not going to be able to do what the 50-year-old could do. And so we have to benchmark those across the decades. But in the perfect world, your physician would be assessing your strength and your proprioception and your cognitive ability. You could go on to what's your community like? Do you have friends? Who's taking care of you? What are you doing? For fun. I did all these things that we know add to a patient's or a person's overall health and wellness. But unfortunately, insurance companies don't reimburse that time. Insurance companies don't metric that. There's no benchmarks for, assessing those in the clinical setting. And so oftentimes those things are, delegated to, other health professionals that can do that. So some functional medicine doctors take care of it, will look into that stuff and do a better job from a holistic standpoint. Of course, there's a lot of people in the exercise science world that can spend an awful lot of time doing that sort of thing. And I think that we're doing a disservice to people by not, taking a look at everything that contributes to overall health and wellness. And we're only really looking at these things that we can um, that we're required to
Mhm.
basically. And as an emergency medicine doctor, I don't do a lot of that stuff. But, when you're going to your doctor for a general routine physical at the end of the year, they're going to do a physical examination and they're going to do, basic blood work, but they're not going to be able to see what your exercise capacity is. They're
Right.
not going to measure your VO2
VO2
max.
max. Yeah.
Can they?
They,
Absolutely.
that would be,
They absolutely can. And so there are people that are doing that, but
yeah.
it's probably not going to be happen through your primary care physician unless they're very forward thinking and have a more comprehensive program out there. But I think it's coming. I think that
Mm,
we're really looking ahead at longevity as um, this lifestyle and longevity piece is becoming much more popular
mhm.
in medicine, and you're seeing a lot of physicians that are kind of bucking the trend of traditional applications of medicine and going more towards this longevity medicine piece. And perhaps there are people that do VO2 max testing and all this stuff on a fairly uh, open market, so you can go have all that stuff done, but it's not something that's going to be reimbursed by your insurance company. It's going to be something that you're going to have to pay for out of pocket, which unfortunately
Uh-uh.
that's the reality.
Yeah. When it becomes more affordable, it'll probably become more mainstream. A lot of things like that, metrics-based things. When they become more affordable, they become more mainstream. I have a question for you, and I know
Mhm.
we're probably getting close to wrapping up here. This is such an interest. This is first of all, this was brilliant to draw these parallels. So thank you for that. I don't know how many people draw parallels between financial health and your own health. So that was great, investing in your own health. So that was so interesting. I'm curious, okay? It's just like if you sit down with your financial advisor and they give you the bad news, you know? Well, hopefully they frame it in a positive way. It can always get better. When people find out in ER, they have, it's becomes clinical, whatever they ignored or neglected over the years, and they get the news. Do you ever hear people really taking that information and feeling like they're really going to make a change? I mean, I know it's hard because you don't necessarily follow through, you don't have that follow up with people, so you don't really know what they're doing 6 months or a couple years down the road. But do you ever get a sense that when people find out they're at this moment in their life where they're sick, they have to make a change. Do you ever get a sense that they want to make a change? Or is that a
And they
hard?
do, and it really comes down to we've got quite a bit of literature on some
Mhm.
things like that, and I don't quote the exact time frame on me, but let's say a patient that comes in with an acute MI, a heart attack, they've got a blocked coronary blood vessel. For me, I see them immediately. We make the diagnosis. They get whisked off to cath lab. The cardiologist does a coronary angiogram. They can intervene if they see a lesion with a stent, or let's say they've got multivessel disease and they're recommended to go to CABG to a CV surgeon. And let's say they undergo triple bypass surgery as a result of multivessel disease. We know that those patients that come out of that tend to be extremely motivated for lifestyle change, right?
Okay.
Because they know that if they're compliant with their diabetes medications, they're compliant with their cholesterol medicine, they're compliant with their dual antiplatelet therapy, they're compliant with their exercise and stuff, that they can modify that future risk, right? So they feel almost like they got lucky or they escaped the big one kind of thing,
Mhm.
and so they tend to be very motivated. But last I saw that motivation lasts about 4 months
Wow.
before they start to reaccumulate their other lifestyle. They'll come home. They'll come from home from the hospital. They'll start their cardiac rehab immediately. They'll start eating better. They'll get rid of all the cookies. They'll get rid of all the chips. They take their medications every single day. They don't miss a dose. They have a kind of a renewed lease on life, but life creeps back in. They stop taking some of their medications. They're not going to cardiac rehab anymore because insurance company's not paying for it. anymore. And so they've transitioned to their own program at the gym. Well, the gym, they don't really feel like going to the gym as much anymore. And we know what happens to that, but then their diet starts to slip because they're feeling better. And so suddenly that experience that motivated them so acutely several months ago no longer has that impact. And so they tend to kind of go back into their normal lifestyle over and of course that's I think that statistically speaking that's the norm, but there are obviously exceptions to
Right.
that. There's some people that don't make any modifications. They go home and immediately go back to smoking. They immediately go back to doing whatever they wanted to do. And of course that there are those people that this is an acutely life-changing event, and they'll do it for the rest of their lives. And so, looking at statistics is all averages, but we know that it probably averages around 4 months that people will maintain that lifestyle change due to an acute stressor or an acute event like that.
Wow. That's a little disheartening, but I think it goes back to why we have our PhDs in leadership and health and human performance, and why we're in the health promotion space. That and why looking, and I just had a podcast episode on motivation, um, and looking at self-determination theory. I just had it with Dr. Condesi Brown, and we were talking about, I highly recommend that episode. So, episode 43, we're talking about intrinsic motivation. And when you start to put in place these basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness, when you start to feel like you have more control over your life, you tend to put in place habits that you can maintain. And so I think that as we wrap up, I would love to continue to talk with you on this. It's just fascinating, but I think a strategy, and I want, would love for you to kind of wrap up in terms of the big takeaway or strategy or something. But for me, what I would say is, take small steps and put in place things that you enjoy doing, because I think you'll stick with them in the long term, right? And the more intrinsically or more internally motivated you are to do something, like get healthy, like invest your money, and also reach out to experts, reach out to people that are out there to help you, coaches, counselors, advisors. There's lots of people that want to help other people. You just have to ask and allow yourself to be a little vulnerable in asking for help. And so there are people out there who will guide you to, more financial freedom and better health overall. So I'm going to let you kind of wrap up what you think the big takeaway is from this conversation. I love having you on the show. I can't wait for you to come back again and, oh, as always, and continue to learn and grow together. So I'll let you wrap up.
No, thanks. I think the biggest thing is that I want people to be able to enjoy their retirement. You know, we that's a lot of what we work towards, when we start on this path of a career, societally we always like to look forward to that time period when we get to backpedal and we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. And in the middle part of our careers we start to get into this financial world where we know that if we invest wisely over time, that the interest compounds and we'll be more financially free. But oftentimes people completely neglect their health and how that would influence, after age 65. And so if you're in no place to enjoy all your hard work, then I think that's sad. It's really sad. And so what I want people to know is that their health and their wellness is just as important, if not more important, than their financial health. And that's hard to forget people to wrap around because they're very money motivated by society pressures. And so I want people to understand that their health is their most powerful asset that they
Mhm.
have. If they can't continue to make money, they can't continue to enjoy life, they can't enjoy their family, they can't do the travel, they can't enjoy retirement, then the financial aspect of it is probably not that important anyway. So you need to be able
Right.
to get there. And so They say that if you've got health and wellness, you've got a million problems, that you're trying to solve in the world. But if you suddenly have no health, then you've only got one problem.
It's
And
very
so
true.
people need to know that their health is just as you can influence your health just as much as you can influence your financial standing with exactly the same concepts. The parallels are very similar. And so sometimes I'm able to reach people by making this correlation between their financial assets and their health assets because it's language that they understand. And the impact of your investment in your health is similar, if not greater, than the impact that you have by using solid financial advice.
Excellent. I mean, I don't know what else we can say. Listen to this episode, take notes, listen to it as often as you need to. At some point in time, I don't know if you probably don't want to share that, contact information right now, but when you get to that point,
Well, you
and
can.
it's up to
I'll,
you.
I'll I'll take any questions or comments or concerns or whatever
How could
anytime.
somebody reach you?
Just my email would be fine. gmgibbons@gmail.com. So gmgibbons @gmail.com.
Excellent. Well, this was great. This gives me a lot to think about, and I love these conversations. They not only they're for our listeners, but I enjoy them too. So thank you so much. I'm gonna sign off and just hang on one second. Don't, stay with me for a minute, and I'm just gonna say
All
goodbye to
right.
our
Thanks for having me,
listeners.
Sarah.
Oh gosh, this was, listen, everybody. I mean, Dr. Gibbons, he's on the front lines, okay? He sees it day in and day out for how many years?
Too many.
But I mean 20,
20, yeah.
20 years, okay? He knows what he's talking about. I don't know how to impress it upon people enough. So, this is good. Well, technically it's not direct advice because, you ultimately
It's
you need to
food for thought.
food for thought.
That's
You need to
that's
work with,
that's that's the
yeah.
way I like to look at it.
Yeah, you need to work with people one-on-one, professionals, but it's food for thought. And we've offered you a beautiful buffet today. So, all
We
right,
were kind of
everybody.
all over the place, but that's okay. Those are the best conversations to have. We're kind of
A
all over the
little
place,
bit.
but
All right.
thanks. You have an amazing day.
Okay, thanks, everybody. As always, I'm grateful to have this platform to educate and motivate on the PhD Journey Unplugged podcast. Bye.